Okay, welcome everybody to another Sustainability Happy Hour. I am here. My name is Pat Keys. I am the lead scientist at the School of Global Environmental Sustainability, SoGES. And this is my co-host,
Micah Bennett. Happy to be here, Pat. Happy to be here on this Friday before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I am happy to be here on this Friday before Thanksgiving, actually. We are gearing up for a pretty exciting show. We've got a great guest today, Professor Scott Denning of the Department of Atmospheric Science at Colorado State University. He's prolific on Twitter. He is a fantastic science communicator and just an all-around very interesting person. So we're excited to chat with him here in a few minutes. But to kick things off, like we normally do, we should probably have a fun fact. Now, I understand, Micah, you were having a little difficulty thinking of a fun fact today.
I know. I'm generally a very fun person, and so they just roll right off. We all know this. But just it's been a bit of a quarantine in the last couple of weeks. So my fun fact is also a public service announcement. I recently did the CSU saliva COVID test.
Whoa.
And it was very slick and very easy. And I would encourage anybody, if you're not showing symptoms, to go do it. You get to go drool into a tube for about 5 minutes. Depends on how quickly
you're not selling this.
Depends on you stand over a garbage can and drool into a tube.
That continues to sell it less.
and like you get to make eye contact with all the other people that are drooling through their separate tubes.
Come on.
So that was really pretty neat. This was the second time I've done it, actually. And my tip to you would be, if you are in a hurry and you can't spend 10 minutes generating 2 milliliters of saliva, which is harder than it seems, while you're walking from your car to the gym where you do it, start collecting the saliva in your mouth. You don't really even have to say anything when you check in. You just show them your card, so you can have your mouth full of spit. And that way, when you get to your garbage can, you can just be like, blah, and then you're done. So do it for science.
So when we started this broadcast, we actually had, I don't know, something like 100 million viewers. And now we are decidedly down to, I don't know, 3. But that's fine.
Do you think it's because of what I just said? I mean, it's not like
I think it's because of what you just said.
No. Anyways, that's my fun fact. Go spit in a tube.
That's a great fun fact. Okay, actually, and it's a hybrid fun fact public service announcement. The really nice thing now, at least at CSU, I understand not everybody who's watching us is here, is that they're trying to be as flexible as possible in accommodating rapid testing and widespread testing. And I think that's, as we all know now, everybody's sort of an expert on pandemics now. We all know that's like a prerequisite for trying to get this current wave under control. Okay, so my fun fact hopefully is not as thrilling as Micah's was, but I have a streak, a 209-day streak that I'm very proud of. What'd you say?
A Snapchat streak?
What's a Snapchat? I'm just kidding. I know what Snapchat is. No, so 209 days of Duolingo. Does anybody use Duolingo? Any Duolingo fans out there?
Yeah.
This is like the free app with like the owl.
The owl. It judges you when you don't.
It judges you, and it's harrowing. It's like it pops up like, hey, I noticed that you haven't been practicing the language that you said you would practice. And then it's like, hello, why didn't you keep practicing the language? So anyway, so I managed the owl that's very pushy. Helped me to get 209 days of Chinese. So on my 209th day of learning Chinese right now. That's kind of fun.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Yeah, and if I was speaking in Chinese, I would say "hen hao," but that's still, though, the minimal amount that I do each day is probably not sufficient to get me very far. But at least the owl is sort of off my back.
That's good.
Okay, let's get going with a few news articles, and then we've got Scott in the green room, and he will be joining us shortly. So without further ado, do you want to give us the first article, Micah?
Sure. So Scott does a lot of work on climate change and discussing climate change. And so we pulled a couple of articles that are in relation to that. This first one is kind of a feel-good article. You know, it's Friday. We're trying to keep things a bit light. This is from Mongabay. Scientists in Costa Rica are growing new corals to save reefs. So this is a long feature piece, and we won't be able to get into it too much. But if you're interested, I would definitely give it a read. There are scientists in the Golfo Dulce in southern Costa Rica, which means, I don't remember what it means. It's somewhere in the article.
Golfo Dulce, I think it's the sweet water.
Sweet water, yeah. And there are these scientists that, well, first of all, the reef there died in a mass bleaching event a few years ago. And like many of the reefs around the world, are struggling to adapt to climate change. And so they are growing new corals on these structures, like a Christmas tree that you've kind of got pulled up there. They've got them growing on ropes in essentially a nursery setting. And then what they will do is they will transplant those to the former reefs so that they can start regrowing there. They pound a stake into the past structure, and then like tie the new piece there. And they've had, in the last 3 years, with some trial and error, they're getting around like an 80% survival rate for these transplants. And the other really interesting thing was that after this mass bleaching event, this coral reef actually bounced back pretty quicker than some other areas have. And so that is why, that's what spurred them to start regrowing them, and that restoration might be a really important key in preserving and managing our coral reefs going forward. So there's a lot in there, but
yeah, this is a pretty long article, and it goes into, can I chime in too?
Yeah.
And it goes in a little bit into how the team was trying to actually reach out and work with all of the people around the Gulf to try and make sure that the scientists understood kind of the importance of the reef and how it connects to the different groups of people in the region. And then the other thing is that the corals that they're actually trying to use are corals that come from a more variable environment in the Gulf. Because one of the problems with climate change is this increased variability, increased extremes related to salinity, related to all temperature, all sorts of things. And so what they're trying to do is identify kind of strains or varieties of coral that are adapted to more variability than perhaps some of the corals that are situated in kind of more regular environments. And so far, this is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
The next article we want to.
Well, I was just going to say, just because, I mean, it won't do much good to transplant these new corals if they're not going to survive in the changing conditions anyways.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next article is, I'm not sure if we've talked about glaciers in the Himalaya specifically, but this is from Reuters. And so this is about the third pole. And so often the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalaya are kind of referred to as the third pole of the planet, the Arctic, the Antarctic, and the Himalaya. And part of the reason that we talk about Himalaya and Tibet that way is how much snow and ice are locked up there is one thing, but also the outsized importance of that frozen water given the several billion people that are in those watersheds. So the headwaters of the Yangtze, the Brahmaputra, the Ganges, the Meghna, all of these rivers, the Mekong, they serve a vast swath of humanity, and any change in this system has a dramatic impact on food security, on mega cities downstream, all sorts of things. And so this zeroes in on one specific glacier, in the Chilean mountains, and it's just looking at the retreat of the glacier. And if you follow kind of glacial retreat in any way in the news, this is a pretty common story where not only is it retreating, but it's accelerating in its retreat. And so this is just kind of digging into a little bit those kind of the phenomena here, looking at some of the scientists that are trying to study this in China. There's some cool drone footage of, I'm not sure how well this is going to work. Well, it looks like it's working all right. And so this is just kind of a drone that's kind of going up over the top of the glacier and just getting an idea of what it looks like. And I mean, I don't know how many people have actually been able to have this perspective on a glacier. I imagine it's quite a few, or very few people. And then the article just does a nice job of looking. You can look at, there's a cool satellite before and after image. So this is the before image, and then we can see the retreat right here. So you can see that there's quite a bit of retreat. And actually, another important thing about glaciers is right now it's very white. So you can see it's very reflective right now. So it's reflecting a lot of the energy back. And right here you can see how muddy and dirty it is. And that has a positive feedback where as it gets muddier and dirtier, it absorbs more heat and it melts more quickly. And especially not just on the surface, but it can seep down into the bottom. And so it also there's other footage here, other drone footage of looking at kind of the farms that are right on the edge of the desert next to some of these glaciers. Because the Tibetan Plateau is weird. It's like this really cold spot that's also a desert. So if you go on Google Maps and you go check it out, it's this kind of very strange environment. Well, I shouldn't say strange, but it's uncommon on Earth. And then it talks a little bit about some of these some farmers that are affected. So this is Gu Jianwei, and he lives in a city near the glacier. And it's just talking about some of the crops and how the seasonality of the stream flow now is changing. So it was flowing more in the summertime, and now it's more springtime dominated. And that has tremendous impacts for crop production. Farmers can't just say, okay, well, I'm just going to irrigate my crops at a different times of year, because the crops simply don't grow at those times of year. Maybe they could find some crops, but it's a lot easier said than done to try and equip farmers with the know-how, the traditional knowledge, the seed, everything to try and switch crop varieties.
Especially when the changes are happening so rapidly. Exactly,
yeah. And I mean, these are parts of the world where farmers have been growing specific types of crops for I was going to say decades, but it's surely centuries. And so anyway, we'll have these articles on the show notes after the show. It's worth checking out. This has some great footage. There's a slideshow at the bottom that just has some fantastic imagery and photography of this kind of melt that's taking place in this glacier. But without further ado, I think we should try and go ahead and bring on our guest. Our guest is Professor Scott Denning of the Department of Atmospheric Science here at Colorado State University. Do we have a thumbs up, Scott? Should we go for it? Okay, we've got a thumbs up. I'm going to take this away. Boom. And let's bring Scott in. Ready, set, go.
Hi.
Contest. Hey, we can hear you. All right.
I'm glad. That's all right. It's good.
So
yeah, go ahead.
Nothing. I was just going to say welcome and happy Friday, TGIF,
and to
all
you.
of those things.
Welcome to the Sustainability Happy Hour.
Thank you very much.
If you are just tuning in, you are watching the Sustainability Happy Hour from the School of Global Environmental Sustainability, and we're here with our guest, Scott Denning. Before we get too far, Scott, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Scott Denning, and I mean, Pat already said all this. I'm a professor in atmospheric science here at CSU. I've been in that job since 1998. What else? Geez, I've lived actually in Fort Collins most of my life, on and off since 1979. Raised my kids here. I have an old chocolate lab. I do astrophotography on the weekends and up in the mountains. And I don't know. That's probably fine. That's enough.
We'll get into the details as we go.
All right.
Well, yeah, thanks again for being here. You work on so many different areas that when we were preparing for the show, we're sort of like, oh boy, like what avenues do we take? So
That's right. Potpourri.
A potpourri.
It's double jeopardy now. So
yeah. What is?
No, I'm just kidding. We're not gonna do that.
Yeah. So my main research, my career really has been to study the global carbon cycle. So where does the CO2 go after we create CO2 by setting carbon on fire? And to some degree, it stays in the air, but only about half of it stays in the air and the other half goes away. Half of the missing carbon is in the land and half of the missing carbon is in the ocean. And my research has been to try to understand the part that goes into the land. So I'm interested in photosynthesis and carbon allocation and turnover and storage and kind of what limits that, and kind of how long will the carbon that has gone into the land stay there, and when will it come back out and bite us in the butt. But I'm also kind of, my angle on that is to look at CO2 in the atmosphere and try to use kind of really subtle variations of atmospheric CO2 to understand the pathways that it takes. So CO2 is pretty well mixed. There's very, very small variations in the atmosphere, but those little bitty variations contain lots of information about sort of where the carbon goes. And so we use measurements from the field or from satellites to try to suss out what parts of the Earth are sucking up CO2 and what parts of the Earth are putting back CO2. And I'm very interested in like the effect of storms and El Nino and the jet stream and clouds and things like that mix CO2 and other tracers through the atmosphere. So that's kind of my research.
Just to dive in just a little bit there, sure. I have a hunch that the people in the audience that we've got today aren't experts like you in this topic. And so what's an example of something like you say in the field? And I'm imagining just like somebody with like a butterfly net that's just like swearing, trying to capture CO2 measurements.
Yeah,
and so
is that how it works?
No. I don't think that's how it works. This is why that's not my job. But how do you do that?
How do you measure CO2? Actually, it's very cool. The longest standing measurements that we have of CO2 are from flasks, and I should have thought to bring one in. I have one in my garage.
Do you mean like a flask, like a chemistry flask?
Yeah, kind of. They look like no, not like that. They look like 2-liter Pepsi bottles, right? So they're like about that big. They're 2-liter flasks. They're made of glass. They're wrapped up with masking tape so that they don't get, if they break, they don't cut you or hurt you. And there's a lab in Boulder at NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that they put pairs of these 2-liter flasks in a styrofoam block, and they ship them by FedEx all over the world. So the sampling method is FedEx. And these FedEx boxes show up at like 100 different places on Earth. And once a week, somebody who has a day job, this is like, nobody has this as their job. They are employed to do something else, but they'll open up this box and they take the flasks out to a particular place that, they've picked ahead of time and basically fill them up with air and then stick them back in the FedEx box and mail them back to Boulder. And then they put them on lab bench instruments in a fancy lab, and they measure all these different gases, not just CO2, but like about a dozen different trace gases. And they've been doing this for close to 50 years. So we've got dozens and dozens of places around the world where the composition of the air is measured in, ridiculous high precision, without actually having to send scientists and instruments and stuff out to the field. You just mail these boxes, and they're in remote places. They're like on mountaintops, on remote islands out in the ocean, and some desert out in Mongolia, whatever.
Wow.
Places where there's not a lot of local pollution and stuff to change the air. And then so basically these are samples of very rural, clean, pristine air that are then analyzed in a lab. And we've got these wonderful data from all over the world. So it's pretty cool, actually.
That's ridiculously cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you say that these folks have a day job, is this like a citizen science project or not quite?
Look, most of the people that do it are, there's a place way up at the very northern tip of Baffin Island in Canada, like an Arctic research station, where you can sort of imagine people with those like moon boots and big down coats and stuff, and they're doing other stuff. They're like maintaining instruments, or they're working on some other thing, but they've been like volunteered or tasked or whatever that, on Wednesdays or whatever, they go and fill up these flasks. It's various. Some of them are like fish and wildlife officials or park rangers or people who have some kind of other, sort of official sounding job.
Right.
But then once a week they fill up a flask and then mail it back.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay, so just to step back, so on the Sustainability Happy Hour, we're not concerned with whether or not climate change is happening because we know it's happening, we know it's bad, all of those things. I know. Sorry, Mike. I just let Mike know that. Sorry, yeah, buzzkill. But I'm sort of interested, especially with somebody like you. You've got almost like a history of climate change perspective in a way, because you've been studying it since probably Jim Hansen testified, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the 80s or beginning of the 90s, whenever there was that kind of well-known testimony that James Hansen, former NASA director, testified before Congress, essentially saying that climate change is going to be a problem. We should probably be doing something about it. And you've been engaged, it seems like, for quite a long time in the science policy interface, almost before it was cool to be a science policy interface person.
Because I'm old, Pat.
I'm not saying that. I didn't say it.
Trying to say it, but saying it in a nice way. That's okay.
No, Scott, but there are plenty of people, though, just to push back, there are plenty of people that are in your position in terms of seniority in your career that did not choose that path, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I'm just curious, when did you think, like, I want to be engaged more than studying the nitty gritty of the carbon cycle, which is critical for our models, for everything, for understanding, for constraining what we understand about the world. When did you sort of decide, like, I need to step out of the safe confines of behind my books and everything and say, I'm going to engage with the public, especially sometimes public that's not interested in hearing about the reality of climate change.
Right.
What was that thought process for you? If there was kind of a...
Sure. So I mean, I've done a bunch of different things, and as you said, it's sort of potpourri. I was a geology major as an undergrad, and so I was into climate as like a paleoclimate perspective.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to admit it, but back in the 70s, so quite a bit before Jim Hansen gave his famous testimony in '88. But it was mostly academic interest. I've always been sort of fascinated with how the world works and trying to understand nature. But really, my beginning of public engagement on climate change was CSU got a wonderful award in 2006. My colleague Dave Randall was the principal investigator on this great big climate modeling center that was headquartered here. And it went on for 10 years and employed maybe 120 people across, 9 different universities. And we had 80 graduate students. I mean, it was a huge thing. And I was the director of education and outreach for the center. And in that capacity, I built a program to talk to little kids, third graders or whatever, about climate, all the way up through high school. And I built a program to teach high school science teachers about climate change. And I built an undergraduate course, and I taught that a whole bunch of times. And then we did just boatloads of web-based education and outreach on climate change. And I started doing talks, right? Going out in public and talking to people. And it's the sort of thing that it's like the rolling snowball or something. And once you start doing it, you realize that people need to hear it, and you get better at doing it. And
I was just going to say, you get really good at doing it. And so it's almost,
it's almost like you to do it.
Hundreds and hundreds of times I've gone to public audiences and talked to them about climate change. So hopefully I'm getting good at it now, because I've had a lot of practice. But that was in '06. And so it's actually a fantastic gig. I got to do wonderful, fun, engaging science with the public for 10 years. And I got paid for it. And then it ended in 2016. The center ended, the award was done, and NSF was finished with funding us. But I decided I just didn't want to stop. So now I just basically do it for free. So it was a professional thing, and now it's just a hobby.
So out of curiosity then, thinking about kind of priorities, especially as hopefully we are pivoting in terms of priorities for climate change internationally, even in terms of how we prioritize the importance of climate change. But as we think about that, as an institution like CSU, do you think there's a space for saying, you know, like this is to get people over maybe a hump, like an activation energy or something, a catalyst, to get people to become these scientists that are capable and good at doing this sort of very important role of helping to explain to people what climate change is, the urgency of it. Do you think there's a space for kind of saying, yeah, that's a good investment, and like you're a great example of why that's a good investment, because for 10 years this was part of your job,
right?
And you got really good at it. And I mean, I have a hard time thinking of a better investment in terms of science policy but it has to be so long term in order to have you feel like maybe not. I don't know.
No, this is great jumping off point. I think not everybody has to do this, and
totally. Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that public outreach on science, not just climate change, but any science, public outreach is kind of a specialty, and
that's fair.
It is okay for a student or a postdoc or young faculty, whatever, to not do that, to do their work. And you know, I guess I love doing the public outreach, and I hope that I'm good at it, and I know it's a lot of fun and very rewarding. And I would encourage people to do it, but I also want to make sure that people understand, especially people who are starting out, that they won't necessarily get, you know, tenure for doing that. They won't necessarily get promoted for doing that. It's not that they won't get tenure if they do that. It's more like, that's not the basis that you're judged on as a young scientist. You still have to do your research, write your papers, advise your students, teach your classes. You know, you have like a job, and it's okay for you to be very busy meeting your commitments to your job and taking care of your family and having hobbies and doing whatever else. And if, over and above all that, you also want to take on a full-time job doing science outreach, more power to you. But it's not like everybody's going to want to do that. So I want to be careful about that. And
the people that are going to be best at it are going to be the people that enjoy doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a passion. It's the sort of thing that you're good at, not because you memorized a bunch of rules and because you took maybe if you take an acting class or an improv class or something.
Toastmasters.
But it's more like the kind of thing that comes from the heart. And I think what happened to me was, I was a very busy scientist. I was in my mid 40s when we got this big award, this big center. I had, 10 research projects, 20 students and postdocs in my group. I was running a gigantic research program. I wasn't doing science outreach. And then all of a sudden I had this job to do science outreach. And I found that I loved it. And it just, it changed my life. It was like this fantastic thing that I got to do all the time, to the point where when the money ran out, I'm just going to keep doing it because it's what I need to do. But it's not for everybody. And you've probably seen unsuccessful science communicators in your life. Mm-hmm. Think about it. You go to a conference, and of course nowadays it's all COVID, but but back in the old days when we used to like fly to conferences and
Before times.
in the before times, we would go into some hotel ballroom, and they would turn off the lights, and everybody's kind of falling asleep, and somebody's droning on about the 17th plot that they've got on the screen, and blah 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 blah. So there's an awful lot of crappy science communication out there, and you don't just do that in public. Right, you have to do it differently. You have to, be a little more entertaining. Otherwise, people will turn the channel.
So I have a question for you, Scott.
Sure.
On your faculty profile, you say that you delight in engaging hostile audiences, and you've spoken. You've given talks to a number of hostile audiences. I'm wondering if you can kind of walk us through
hostile. These aren't people with like swords and things.
Not
people,
quite.
Perhaps climate change deniers, science skeptics.
I do quite a bit of that.
Can you just walk us through?
Hard to get a gig doing that. I mean, people don't. Those people don't.
They don't invite you to speak very often.
No, you have to really kind of work on it to get invited to places like that.
So what are some of your strategies? What are some of your communication strategies when you're up there? And like, what do you do when people, I don't know, have you ever had hecklers? Like, walk us through, like you're walking up to the podium through the end of your talk. Walk us through that.
I guess with any audience, it's, you have to be yourself. I am fairly casual. I try not to use a lot of big words. I don't hide behind titles and authority. I try to relate to people as a human being. I may tell stories. I may tell jokes. I have a hopeful message. I do not beat people down with graphs and acronyms. I try to explain science using examples and analogies from everyday life. I talk about, how do we know that adding CO2 warms the atmosphere? Because we know that when you add heat to things, they warm up, right? This is like pretty straightforward. Everybody knows this. And then I do tell them that it's bad, that the consequences from climate change are potentially really horrendous. But I never stop there. I always go towards what can you do about it, in terms of, basically. So my shtick is the 3 S's: simple, serious, and solvable. Simple is how does it work? Serious is why is it bad? Solvable is what are you going to do about it? Simple, adding heat to things warms them up. Serious, it's going to destroy the world if you don't do something about it. Solvable, stop setting shit on fire. So this is kind of how it is. And I depends on the audience. So I'll tell you a story. I think you're sort of looking for a story. I did the first one of these things that I did was at the Heartland Institute, which is this sort of uber climate change denier think tank or whatever you call it in Chicago. And I went to their annual meeting, and it was in this like giant Marriott ballroom in downtown Chicago. And they had a 3-day conference on climate change denial. Imagine that. And I think there were 75 speakers in 3 days. And I was the only one who thought that climate change was a thing. Everybody else thought that it was a hoax.
Wait, so, and did they let you in? How did they, how'd you
well,
get in?
They invited me. So, I mean, that's kind of a longish story, but I got asked to do a thing here in the Front Range, and I killed it, and they liked me, and they said, oh, we should have this guy to our annual meeting. And so then I went to the annual meeting, and, it's like any other conference. You go in and there's like a registration desk, and you get your name badge and you get your agenda, and you walk in there, and in the registration packet, you guys know about the hockey stick, right? There's this like famous graph of temperatures that was like pretty flat for thousands of years, and then it goes up real steep at the end.
Yeah.
So that graph, the hockey stick graph, Mike Mann is associated with that that graph. And these guys really, really don't like the hockey stick. They think that's like I don't know, it's a conspiracy theory. I mean, you can just sort of imagine how that plays out. They were handing out hockey sticks in their registration packet. So they were little mini ones, thank God. But they were like 18 inches long, made out of plywood, and it said some nasty things about Michael Mann on the hockey stick. So I walk into this room, and there's like 600 of these guys, and they're almost all guys. They're like, 80+% old men, white, bald or gray hair, and they've got sticks. And, and I'm standing up there, and I'm trying to tell my jokes and simple, serious, and solvable. But it was great because they have this kind of like negative body language when I came up, and then I'm self-deprecating, and I'm telling jokes, and I'm gosh golly, and not using big words, and halfway through they're laughing at my jokes, they're opening up, they're nodding, you can see them, they're kind of like softening up.
They're loosening the grip on their sticks.
Yeah, well, hope so. And then I'm sure I didn't change most of their minds. Come on, these are like super ensconced conspiracy theorists. But what the coolest thing is that over the course of 3 days at this conference, dozens of them, I mean, I'll bet 50, 60, 70 of them would come up to me in the hallway, in the elevator, in the bar, and say, "Thank you. I never really thought about it like that. I really appreciate you being willing to come and talk with us." So
wow.
It was like they were real people.
Yeah.
And they have a mask. They have a persona that they have to put on for their group, for their friends, for their, their team. And then by kind of being a bit vulnerable and being there in this group, in this moment, I was able to connect with some of these people. One of them was a government minister from New Zealand.
No kidding.
A sitting, minister of something or other from New Zealand. And he invited me over to his table at dinner, and he introduced me to his wife. And he said, "If you ever come to New Zealand, you have to come stay in our house." And I mean, he's a climate denier, but really nice. So I don't know. I think there's something special about reaching across political divides, ideological divides, even to some degree intellectual divides, and connecting to people, because people underneath there's a softie in there, and you just got to find them.
I think that story. I just think that story really illustrates well the point that so often, people want to like take something like climate and science and say there's no emotional component to this. This is all straight facts, no emotion. But
Bullshit.
but there's tons of emotion, and sort of emotionally connecting is the first step into like a transformation that would not have happened without sort of that vulnerability.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There is, as scientists, we acknowledge that there's an objective reality out there. We know that there are things that are true and things that are false. And yet we are people. Yeah, there's no getting around that. We are always going to be people. We have subjective reactions to things and emotional reactions to things. We're social animals. We relate to one another, or we don't. You gotta. You're not going to reach people and change their minds if you only sort of approach them on an intellectual level. I think there's a crucial human element there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So we don't want to, we could keep talking forever. And so we we do want to sort of touch on some of the other kind of things that you do beyond that particular aspect of your job. And I guess still staying with the climate change theme though, one of the things that you are quite honest about, and I find it refreshing, is that you think that climate change is quite serious, and that if we don't do something to address climate change, that it could be very serious.
Yeah.
And terrible. And you earlier, I think it was this week, you tweeted something, somebody had said, this is the new normal. And you tweeted something saying that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
Because new normal implies this is like a new steady state. This is kind of the new place that we're at. And you make the point in your tweet, you say, this will be the coolest and most pleasant decade of the next century, the coolest and most pleasant century of the next millennium.
Yeah.
And now my read of climate change science is consistent with that as well. But I often almost, I sort of demur at stating things that starkly. But I think I almost feel like the time has come to sort of say, no, if you're a climate scientist and this is your job and you're interpreting the science in this way, it's sort of a time to start saying that. And I know that sounds people would say that's alarmist. And it's like, well, at some point somebody has to ring the alarm, right?
Yeah.
That's why we have an alarm, right? We have an alarm there so that in case we know something's wrong, it will go off. And unless there's somebody else who's going to ring it, I think somebody needs to ring
the smoke alarm goes off in my house in the middle of the night. It's almost always a false alarm, and that's a pain in the ass. But I'm still going to go check, right? I'm going to say, is my house
a good
on
analogy.
Fire? Yeah, because if my house is on fire, I want an alarm.
Yeah. And so I guess, pivoting away from the kind of the hostile audience communication side of things, and I'm almost thinking even within, I don't know what you would want to call them, the people that believe that climate change is happening or agree with that, whatever observation or interpretation of the facts, even among that group of people, this kind of message of like, this is not a new normal. Normal is not something we'll probably see for well over a century, even if we start doing everything right now, because everything has to re-equilibrate. So how do you strike that in terms of communicating that to people that it's not like they need to be convinced climate change is happening, but they sort of need to be convinced that it's much more serious than, or it's seeming like increasingly it's much more serious than we thought in the past, perhaps.
Yeah. Great question. So there's a balance. I think that it is, I use my 3 S's: simple, serious, and solvable, right? And serious is the middle one. Serious is the sort of central message. It's the pivot point, and you have to be motivated by the seriousness.
Oh, you lost your sound, Scott.
Really?
Oh, no, I can hear him.
I hear you. Uh-oh, Pat.
I lost the sound.
Can you not hear me?
You're the one who's going wonky.
Okay, I'm going to keep talking as if everything is okay. All right?
Sounds good. I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Oh, it was just me.
Okay. So, yes, it's very, very serious. And, the real message is that it gets worse and worse and worse until we stop making it get worse. And then it doesn't get better for a really, really long time. So the point is not this is going to kill you. The point is there's no end of how much worse this can get. So you really have to stop making it worse ASAP. And the way to do that is to stop setting carbon on fire. And then I have a whole bunch of messages about how to stop setting carbon on fire. So,
which is great because people like to have that sense of control, right? Right.
And so I would never only present the middle S. I would never I teach a 15-week undergraduate course on climate change. And I try to do about 5 weeks on simple, 5 weeks on serious, and 5 weeks on solvable. If I give a 45-minute talk, I do 15 minutes on simple, 15 on serious, and 15 on solvable. If somebody asks me on an airplane what I do for a living, and I tell them, and then they say, tell me about climate change, I give them about 15 seconds of simple, 15 seconds of serious, and 15 seconds of solvable. It's got to be balanced. You don't want to just beat somebody over the head with how horrible things are, because their reaction as a human being is to shut down. And it is serious. It's the biggest problem in the world, and we have to deal with it. And here's a whole bunch of ways to deal with it, right? So you can't just torture people with expectations of doom and then expect them. I mean, what's your reaction to that? You're just going to go home and drink. It's terrible. You have to have some response to the seriousness. But look, the bottom line, the real nut of how serious it is that the part of the carbon that stays in the atmosphere, some of that will stay in the atmosphere for thousands and thousands of years. So every new lump of coal that we burn adds permanently to the CO2 in the atmosphere. And if we just keep doing that until things are, catastrophic end of the world bad, they'll just stay catastrophic end of the world bad. That's not okay. We can't do that. We have to stop short of that. So you have to talk about that. It's not like you can let people off the hook, but neither do you want to just crush them with how bad things can get, because they can get really bad.
Right.
I think I think it's important to note that when you say, you always end with 15 minutes of solvable, that's because there are solvable things. Like you're not just like, it's not just like false hope or like ways
it's
to
not just light
pacify
bulbs.
people.
It's not just light bulbs.
People say, is there hope? Do you have hope? And basically it's the wrong question. It's like, imagine that, I've got this chainsaw and I could cut my leg off right now, right here in front of me. Do I have hope that I won't cut my leg off? That's stupid. Don't cut your leg off, right? Like, the choice is ours whether we like jump off this cliff or not. Do I have hope? I'll tell you what, I have a choice not to jump off the cliff, right? I have the choice not to cut off my leg. I have the choice not to dig up all that carbon and set it on fire and ruin the world. And that's better than hope. That's actually agency. That's determination and intention. So I think it's hope is the wrong framing. It's more like agency, but determination.
Yeah.
I really like that. That's really good. Okay, so if you had one, I know that we've talked a lot about the serious part just now. If you had like one favorite solution, like, do you have a favorite? It doesn't have to be the most.
Stop setting carbon on fire, right? So unfortunately, that means two things. So you can unpack it. You start with stop setting carbon on fire. Well, how do you do that? Well, actually both. You learn to live well with less energy, and you learn to make energy that doesn't involve setting carbon on fire. And so then you can sort of drill into each of those, what is overconsumption or different kinds of consumption, or all the stuff that we know and love, like better insulation and better windows and better doors and better cars and better trains and blah, 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 blah. That's all on the sort of live well with less energy. And then on the make energy without combustion, there's solar, there's wind, there's nuclear, there's water. But then there's also distribution, and there's storage, and there's efficiency, and there's load balancing, and there's all this kind of engineering stuff. But when it comes right down to it, because we're human, then I almost want a fourth S, but there's only three. So
what's the fourth S? What you got? What's the fourth S?
Could be story.
Could
be something like that. So I like to tell this story that people who study the economics of climate change, and there's a whole field, right? I mean, they're just like climate scientists. There's a huge number of climate economists out there in the world, and they do this stuff, and they argue, and they go to conferences, and they write papers. They call each other names. They get the Nobel Prize. But that field has sort of settled on a number that's about 1% of the world economy is about what it costs to completely stop setting shit on fire. And, that's actually a huge number. It doesn't sound like much when you say 1%, but 1% of every dollar on Earth, right? So, but by comparison, like that's more than the U.S. defense budget. It's a pretty big number. But it's actually not a whole lot bigger than the money that we spend every year on cell phones. It's quite a bit less than the money we spend every year on cars. It's vastly less than the money that we spent to build all the paved roads in the world in the last 100 years. And you think back, so here's my story. In my grandmother, my father's mother, was born in 1895. She lived in New York City, and she helped her dad. Her dad was a grocer, and she delivered groceries door to door in New York City on horse with a horse-drawn cart. My grandmother, amazing. So in her lifetime, they did indoor plumbing. I mean, they started when she was a little kid, they had to pee in a pot and dump it out the window. Oh my God. And they dug all the streets up in New York, and they laid sewer pipe, and they put, hot and cold running water in the tenements, and they put sinks and showers and stuff in the apartments. And that was an enormous amount of money. It was certainly comparable to what we're talking about here. And it didn't break the bank. It didn't destroy the world. In fact, everybody lived better by spending all that money and putting in toilets. And then, they did electricity out in Nebraska. Think about if you had to pay like union electricians today to run a separate little copper wire to every farmhouse in Nebraska and rig them up. I mean, forget it, right? It's just the labor alone would be outrageous. And yet it didn't break the bank, right? People actually did that, and it was okay, and that people actually made money doing that. And in our own time, well, maybe not your time, in my time, we, not me personally, we bought billions of computers and put them on every office desk on Earth every 3 years for a generation. It's just staggering how much money that costs. Drastically more than we're talking about to stop climate change. And it didn't break the bank. In fact, it generated all the jobs and prosperity in my young adulthood. And then we did it again with phones. And then we did it again with the internet. Yeah, and this is just what we do. As modern people, we abandon old technologies and old infrastructures that were working just fine, right? People were okay with horses, but cars cost, 100 times what horses cost, but we switched to cars. We switched to phones. We switched to cell phones. We switched to the internet. Now we're going to switch off of coal, oil, and gas and onto other stuff. Get over it. It's not really that hard. It's hard. It's hard like cell phones were hard. It's hard like computers were hard. It's not hard like, I don't know, it's not as hard as defeating totalitarianism. It's not as hard as vanquishing hate and oppression. Those are hard, right? Those are really hard because that's like human nature you're up against. This is like a walk in the park compared to that. So I really think not only that we can do this, but that we must do it, and therefore that we will do it. Because it's what people do, especially when their back is against the wall and they have no choice but to do it. So that's kind of my shtick.
That's great. I think that's a
even
really
climate deniers. They get up and stand up and applaud at the end of something like that.
I mean, I feel better.
Same here
than I did, 10 minutes ago.
Good.
So good job. That was like the condensed solutions, but we got it in there. Okay, so to pivot to something, as Monty Python would say, and now for something completely different, I'm going to show a cool picture that you apparently took. I still sort of don't believe you took this picture. Let's see if I can pull it up. Okay. So you said on Twitter the other day, a trillion suns and trillions of worlds sparkling before the dawn of humanity above my backyard over the past few nights. Holy cow, you took this picture.
Yeah, you should click on the picture now and it'll get big.
I'm going to click on the picture. Wow.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Wow.
That's in my backyard. It's in your backyard too. Isn't that cool?
So what galaxy is this?
That's the Andromeda Galaxy. That's our nearest neighbor, big galaxy. It's 2.5 million years ago. You're looking 2.5 million years back in time when you look at that. So it's like the dawn of the humanity. There's a trillion suns there. There's probably 10 trillion planets. It's big too. It's not, it's through a telescope, but I mean, if I hold my hand up, it's like the size of 3 or 4 fingers across.
Wow.
Held at arm's length. It's a huge thing. It's way bigger than the moon.
Wow, that's cool.
And it's up there. It's up there all the time in the night. Yeah. Welcome to the universe.
Okay, so I wanted to, so I know this is one of your hobbies, and we could have a whole other show probably of you telling us about really cool astronomy stuff. And maybe we will actually invite you back and we could talk about that. But we should probably try and wrap things up a bit. So before we ask you our final question that we ask every guest on this show,
I don't think he knows. I did not prep him for that question. So
it's okay. It's pretty benign. It's pretty innocuous. But if you had anything else that you'd like to say, or a final parting, anything.
Wow. You sure you don't have a real question there? You just want me to talk?
Yeah.
So
this is a happy hour. There's no rules.
It's a happy hour. So sustainability. So what does sustainability mean? It means you get to keep doing it, right? That's what sustainability means. We can't, as human beings, we have sort of finite lives. There's the story. There's only so many chapters. I'm getting I don't know. I'm 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through my book. But do what makes you happy. It's just it's such a joy to be able to be a scientist, to follow. When I was a child, I wanted to be an astronomer. As I'm, now I'm old and rich and I can buy cameras and telescopes and take these pictures. And then when I was in college, I went on a trip to the Grand Canyon and I discovered the layers of the Earth and said, wow, I want to be a geologist. So I became a geologist. And I learned all this really cool stuff about deep time and paleoclimate. And then I went and got a job in the oil industry, and the oil industry collapsed. Then I got a job working up in the mountains here in Rocky Mountain National Park, collecting stream samples and snow samples to analyze air pollution impacts on alpine forests. And then that got me into climate. And then I went and did atmospheric science. I got a PhD. I became a famous carbon cycle scientist. And then I got this gig doing, climate change education and talking to climate change deniers. And God, what a great trip. What a wonderful, fun thing. Just following the next cool thing. And if you do what floats your boat, you tend to be pretty good at it. And lo and behold, people will pay you to do it. We are lucky being in science. We get to do really cool stuff. And you don't get rich, but you don't have to, eat beans either. I like beans, but yeah, it's good, man. It's a good thing. Follow your passion, and it's gonna be fun.
That's good. I like that. Okay, so then the last question.
Wait. I have one intermediate question.
Oh my goodness.
Did you get to take a hockey stick from that conference?
Oh yeah, I have it in my office.
You still have it?
Oh wow, that's amazing.
I have it propped up next to my carbon flask, and I have a little globe, and yeah, it's like my
That's
special
awesome.
tourist thing. Yep.
Okay, so the last question that we always ask everybody is, during this kind of unprecedented, oh, I totally forgot. We didn't even ask you about semester at sea.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
What a time
we'll
that
have
probably
another
was.
show on that.
We'll have another show. We're going to invite you back next year or next. Okay, so but separate from that, what's during this pandemic? We're in this sort of new reality. Everybody's working from home, and I have to admit, when we started this show way back, I don't even know when we started it. May. I wasn't thinking that it would still be happening now, quite like it is. But so in the midst of all of this, though, what's like one happy or positive thing that has happened to you? And it can be small, and not work related. Doesn't have to be, but just something like a silver lining or a bright spot for you.
Yeah. Well, so for me, I went on halftime at CSU July 1. So it means that I don't have as much work as I did. And of course, we're working from home, and there's all this Zoom stuff. It's actually pretty cool. I am part of a group in my neighborhood where we do a weekly Zoom get together with about 20 people. And these are people I mean, I knew them to say hi, but every other week somebody tells their life story on Zoom. So I'm getting to know my neighbors. We would go over to the food trucks in City Park and sit, socially distanced and hang out. And it's like, I have new friends. I have cool. New connections to my community, my neighbors, in a way, partly because everybody is going through this crap.
Yeah.
And we can be there for each other. We can help each other. We can, like, if somebody's sick or if somebody, needs errands or stuff done in their garden or whatever, it's really great. So yeah, that's one little silver lining.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, Scott, this has been a fantastic, a little bit over an hour, but thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you very much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Scott.
I'll have to keep an eye on you for next time. All right.
That's absolutely right. Okay, so have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so yeah, we didn't even touch on probably.
We didn't even scratch the surface.
Okay, so we'll make sure all of our loyal viewers out there, we will make sure that we get Scott back on the show to talk about all this other cool stuff. So we're a little bit over time.
We did have one comment though. We want to make sure we bring them in. Yeah. I don't know how to. Do you click on it?
I got it.
Okay.
So Ryan, you'll be able to float your boat in all the extra ocean water coming our way. Yes. Well, hopefully not here in Colorado, Ryan. that would be sort of a day after tomorrow situation or something even worse than that.
That's such a good movie.
It's one of my favorite terrible climate. Like all the things are wrong in it, but it's still like it's a classic terrible movie.
I watched it as a kid and like got scared. Like I was afraid.
No.
Anyways,
don't worry. Dennis Quaid will take care of you. Okay.
I have a very brief SoGES plug.
Yes.
If you like this show and you want to make sure you never miss it, you can sign up to get email updates right into your inbox. Go to sustainability.colostate.edu/sustainability happy hour. You will get emails right from me about this show. And then also just have a great holiday for all you CSU folks, students that are on break and staff and faculty. Have a great holiday break. Whatever you end up doing, follow all the public health guidances, keep your mask on. And our next guest.
Our next guest. Boom. Our next guest is going to be Erica Osborne, Associate Professor of Painting here at CSU. And her focus is a lot of environmental art. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to be speaking with her a little bit about that and how she infuses both in education and her own kind of artistic practice, kind of elements of sustainability and the environment. And so come back 2 weeks from now. So the week after Thanksgiving,
Friday, December 4th.
December 4th.
Yep.
Be here or don't be here. It's Fridays. Everybody's busy, but
we like it when you join us.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us for another week. Safe travels or safe staying put. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
All right. Bye.